Okay, the Owl House episode for the future is coming out in a few weeks. Time to make some videos on the show and get hyped for this episode. Okay, this. These videos ideas are pointless now. Let's talk more about Amphibia in the meantime, I guess. Even though Amphibia is at its core a fun, lighthearted show, it has its fair share of moments filled with lots of pain and suffering for the characters, especially for the Calamity Trio. So among the three girls, who had the best and worst experience in Amphibia? Not gonna lie, I thought this question was going to be a really simple one to answer, but in reality, it's actually more complicated than you think. The main problem with answering this question is that there aren't really many quantifiable factors we can look at to measure the overall experience of one person in this show. What we mostly have instead are qualitative factors based on what we actually see in the show and in Marcy's journal. There are a few quantitative factors we can look at, like the amount of times the characters are known to be injured and the amount of relationships they had. But for the most part, I'm going to be answering this question based on my own intuition and personal judgments, so basically like most of my videos. So whatever conclusion I come to this question, you can easily argue otherwise and I won't have a problem with it. With that caveat out of the way, I'm going to explain my answer in a way that's rather digestible. We're going to look at each of the 3 seasons of Amphibia individually, rank the 3 girls based on how good/bad of an experience they had in each season, then add up their scores. With all that made clear, let's first look at season 1. So for season 1, it's pretty easy to say that Marcy had the best time in Amphibia. Based on what we see from her journal and theme song takeover, she had the best starting point. She lived the most comfortable lifestyle, and she was able to grow with only mild amounts of challenge. Sure, she did have her difficulties like the emotional pain she had thinking about Anne and Sasha's safety, and there was a moment where her own life was at risk. But all those difficulties were nothing compared to what Anne and Sasha went through. So Marcy definitely did not have a rough time in Amphibia during season 1. However, choosing between Anne and Sasha for who had the worst time is more difficult. In the first half of season 1, Anne definitely had the better position than Sasha due to the planters willing to give Anne a place to live, food to eat, even if it's not good, and more importantly, love and care for her. Sasha technically had food and shelter too, but had significantly less freedom. In the second half of the season, however, Sasha got a boost in her standard of living and even got food that is arguably better than Marcy's cuisine in Utopia. Also, like Marcy, Sasha got a position of power and did rather enjoy herself overall. However, it is fair to also say that Sasha was in the worst position out of the 3 by the end of season 1 after the destruction of Toad Tower and nearly dying at the end of Reunion. To be honest, you can make an argument for either person, but I'm gonna give the edge to Sasha for the worst time in season 1 considering she started and ended at worse positions than Anne. So on the scoreboard for best experience in Amphibia so far, Marcy has 3 points, Anne has 2 points, and Sasha has 1 point. Next up, Season 2. Fortunately for me, Season 2 is easier to analyze. Out of the 3, Sasha definitely had the worst experience during this time. She started out the season still trying to get over the events of Reunion and only has Grime, Percy, and Braddock as her companions. And Grime was considered a fugitive, while Percy and Braddock abandoned Sasha after Beryl's Warhammer. When you look at her living conditions, Sasha had the worst among the trio during Season 2, and the only time her conditions were good were in the dinner and Battle of the Bands. But then she fell off by the end of Season 2, losing nearly everything she and Grime had built up to that point. So yes, Sasha did not have a good Season 2. As for Marcy, she had a much better experience for most of the season. She continued to live a lavish lifestyle like in Season 1, but this time she's reunited with Anne, which eliminated one of the few struggles she had. Sure, Marcy still faced a few difficulties, and her living conditions did take a downgrade when she lived in Wartwood with Anne and the Planters, but for the most part, she did enjoy herself up through Battle of the Bands, where it's safe to say that was the only time in the series, except for maybe the series finale, where the entire trio were on equal footing regarding how content they are with the moment. However, by the end of True Colors, Marcy's conditions fell rock bottom after her secret was exposed, and of course, when this happened.
I just need to...
Yeah, so Marcy lived a great time, but then she stopped living. Thankfully only temporarily, but more on that later. That leaves Anne, who pretty easily had the best experience during Season 2. Sure, her living conditions during the first quarter of the season were pretty mid.
My first town outside of Wartwood! I wonder what it'll be like. Will the frogs be friendly? Will they have a bathroom?
But once she reunited with Marcy, those two had pretty similar living conditions. In addition, Anne by this point had developed pretty solid connections with the people of Wartwood, which helps improve her self-esteem in the long run. However, Anne did suffer from more pain than Marcy during the temple trials. Also, Anne unfortunately was betrayed 4 times throughout the season and witnessed 2 of her friends face seemingly certain death, which definitely left emotional scars on her. But by the end of the season, she was the only one in the trio who had cool anime powers and, more importantly, reached safety to Earth. So in the scoreboard for best experience in Amphibia so far, Marcy gets another 2 points and gets another 3 points, and Sasha gets, once again, 1 point. Last but not least, Season 3. So it's safe to say that Season 3 was the worst time for the trio in Amphibia. Fortunately for Anne though, she was on Earth for the first half of it, which means that she didn't suffer in Amphibia for as long as Sasha and Marcy. When she did return, while her living conditions were worse than what she had earlier in the show,
Here, go find yourselves a nice cave to inhabit.
I sure am gonna miss the electric toothbrush.
Cheer up, Hop Pop. Maybe we can find a cave with some soft lichen to sleep on.
Oh.
they are still decent and on par with Sasha. Although it can be argued that Anne was the one who ended up in the worst position at the end of their time in Amphibia because she was the only one in the trio to face a real death. Sure, she was happy when she passed on, and she was technically revived, but again, there's an argument to be made on whether that's actually her, but we don't need to go into that discussion.
Well, that's gonna cause some serious existential dread later on.
The point is that Anne did have a lot of pain and suffering in the finale. But regardless of what happened to her there, considering that she avoided a lot of the turmoil in Amphibia during the first half of the season, she easily had the best experience in Amphibia among the trio during Season 3. More accurately though, she had the least bad experience because again, none of them really had a great time in that world at this point of the show. You can say something similar to Sasha as well, who had similar experience with Anne but for the whole season. Like I said before, her lifestyle during this time isn't great, and being a wartime leader while also dealing with redeeming herself for Anne can drain quite a lot out of her. Also, Sasha had a good amount of gross and painful moments. However, at least Sasha was in a better position than where she was in Season 2, as she accumulated the most amount of power she ever had. Definitely more power than what Marcy had. Speaking of whom, nearly everyone who likes her, at least a little bit, cannot help but feel bad for her. Which makes complete sense. For most of Season 3A, she was in a comatose state. When she was finally awakened, she had to face her worst fear, and after a minute of happiness, she got possessed and lost whatever free will she had left. For most of the season onward, we don't know much about what she experienced aside from maybe solving puzzles and playing games that the core made for her. Granted, both of those are what Marcy liked, but they're not real. Once she was finally freed, she did have a few more moments of joy as she reconciled with their friends and gained cool anime powers with Anne and Sasha. However, those are definitely not enough to cancel out the pain and suffering she went through to reach that point. This is a long-winded way of saying that Marcy's time in Season 3 is definitely the worst among the trio. I mean, I feel like this is a worse punishment than death, to be honest. So with all 3 seasons looked at, let's tally up the results. The person who had the worst experience in Amphibia is Sasha with a score of 4 points. Next up is Marcy with a score of 6 points. Finally, the person with the best experience in Amphibia is Anne with a score of 8 points. Admittedly, I did not have to overly explain all of this to show that Sasha had the worst time. She started out as the main antagonist of the show, and in order to redeem herself, she had to go through a lot of trial by fire, like what I explained in an earlier video. As for Anne, it makes perfect sense that she got the most benefit from her time in Amphibia. The show is about her and how she grew as a person. In addition, out of the 3, Anne developed the most long-lasting relationships with others in that world. This really explains why she's the one who misses Amphibia the most and tries to relive it as much as she can a decade after her adventure. It's kind of ironic, actually, how Marcy was the one who wanted to go to another world, but Anne was the one who benefited the most from that choice. I guess what Marcy says here is very accurate.
But look at how much fun we've had. Look at how much you've both grown. Look at Sprig. I gave you this. I gave you everything.
Still, that doesn't justify what she did, which is why it's kind of fitting for Marcy to have an in-between experience in Amphibia compared to the rest of the Calamity Trio. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. Who do you guys think had the best and worst time in Amphibia? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, thank you to these lovely people for supporting me through Patreon and YouTube memberships. Seriously, they go a long way as their support helps me justify spending as much time as I do to make content like this. With all that said, thanks for watching. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.